Jnanatimurandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Good evening, everybody. We're starting with a small crowd tonight, and that's okay. Small. Oh, and here comes Jamie. Want to be clear, Jamie, I thought your question was a good question yesterday. I have no... Yes, it was a perfectly suitable question. Don't worry about that at all.
I have a question.
Okay.
But I have an appointment at 7:30, so when I leave, I'm not being rude. Just
Okay, let's get your question out right now. You ready?
I wrote it out.
Okay, it's written down. Okay. There you go.
In the path of devotion, forgiveness is often seen as a way to cultivate humility and transcend resentment. However, devotees may struggle with different forms of forgiveness. I'll just kind of run down the list of forgiveness because forgiveness is so important, and I find that a lot of people they struggle with forgiveness.
Okay.
Some people struggle with self-forgiveness. Some have a hard time forgiving others for direct harm, whether that be intentional or unintentional. Forgiving someone who has wrongly accused you of something when no harm has been done. Conditional forgiveness. Incomplete forgiveness. Weaponized forgiveness. And resentful forgiveness. And I can go into a couple definitions if you want me to. But my question is, how would you guide devotees in navigating these challenges while staying aligned with Krishna consciousness?
Okay. This is a very good question, and I get a lot of, since I've been here, we're starting to wind it up now. I do tonight and 2 more nights, and I've been here for about a month, so I don't know, it's probably been about 25 nights so far, something like that, maybe a little bit more. And the questions about forgiveness have come up quite often. So it seems to be somehow, as a community, this is important, and maybe we struggle with it. So let's try to understand it from the perspective of the philosophy of bhakti. And I want to clarify something. It's a little subtle, but if you catch it, then it makes a difference. And that is, there's one book. It was written by a sage named Bhaktivinoda Thakur. He lived about, he probably wrote this in the late 1800s. Oh, sorry. Get that mic there. Okay, it's fine. I'll leave it like this. So he wrote this in the late 1800s. He was a Bhaktivinoda Thakur. He was one of the most exceptionally brilliant spiritual minds. He was a real Bhakti Renaissance man. He was a real, prolific writer, prolific songwriter. Prolific writer of books, prolific writer of songs. But he also had a whole other life where, he was kind of, the British government really needed him. He was a high court judge. He ran the Jagannath Temple, one of the largest temples in India. He was reaching out to thousands and thousands of people all across Bengal. He just had he had about 10 children. Just an amazing, I don't know how one person can do so much. But he was so insightful, and he wrote an incredible book, hard to get in the English language, but it's called Jaiva Dharma. But this was a book that was written in the form of like a novel. He created characters, and they were asked, a lot of it was questions and answers between these characters in a holy place in Bengal. So within that book, he framed a dialogue where one disciple was questioning a very deeply spiritual guru. And his question was this: does one need humility in order to practice bhakti, or in order to develop bhakti? Okay? And you would think the answer would be yes, but not quite. He wanted to key in on this subtle idea. He said that rather humility is something that is within bhakti. When you have devotion for God, then you have humility. And if you don't, then you don't. And so the idea is that we may practice humility, not really have it, but practice it. But we won't really have it until we have devotion, because within the circle of devotion or love, humility is inside that, as well as forgiveness, as well as compassion, and as well as truth. And he said, when you have humility and when you have compassion, then you can't help but forgive, right? If you're like, I'm just, I'm a spark of spiritual energy, but I'm just one tiny spark amongst unlimited sparks. And I want for every other little spark of conscious spiritual energy in existence to have joy as their experience. So then even if someone slights you or harms you, mistreats you, misjudges you, unfairly criticizes you, whatever it may be, your humility says this is not so important. If I have a big inflated ego, I think this is very important. And if I have humility, I feel this is not very important. And if I have compassion, then I don't want that person to suffer. So I forgive. It's just natural. So if we can develop devotion or love of God, forgiveness will be inside. But meanwhile, until we get there, just as we're practicing devotion, we can practice forgiveness. Okay? And then when the devotion is mature, the forgiveness will be mature. And all of the things you're saying about like conditional forgiveness or incomplete forgiveness, it will cease to be conditional. It'll cease to be incomplete when the devotion is complete. When our love for God is complete, when our bhakti is complete, our forgiveness will be complete right with it. And in the meanwhile, we're practicing both of them parallel. That make sense? Okay, so it's a bit of a subtle idea, but it really helps us understand where to focus. Also because that forgiveness is not something that's done from the perspective of bhakti. It's not something that's just, in a sense, one decides I would like to do this. But rather it's seen as very much consistent and integral to the idea of love for God. Forgiveness. It's built right in. Right? So then how is it built right in? Let's look at it from a philosophical perspective. First let's look at it from a practical perspective. From a practical perspective, my practice of bhakti requires that my mind become deeply absorbed in Krishna's name, in Krishna's form, in Krishna's qualities, in Krishna's pastimes. That becomes the object of the meditation. And in order to bring my mind to those objects of meditation with deep absorption, there needs to be the bandwidth within the mind. And probably the biggest, I suppose there are many things that could take up that bandwidth. There's really unlimited forms of distraction, particularly in our modern age. But that being said, maybe the one that's the most engrossing is resentments. When we feel we've been mistreated, when we feel we've been slighted, when we feel we've been wronged in some way, it can dominate one's thoughts. I'm going to speak a confession right now, okay? There was a point in my history where I really felt like I was really being wronged by a number of people, all in one context, and it was dominating my thoughts. It was putting me in difficult situations, and it was running through my head very intensely. It was one of the more intense peak stress eras of my life. I used to have trouble sleeping because of it. I'd go to bed at night and I would just lie there and I wouldn't be able to let go of the thoughts. They would keep me up. And then sometimes after falling asleep late at night, I would wake up in the middle of the night. And the instant that I'd wake up, the thoughts of that would be right there again, right in the forefront of my awareness, right at the forefront of my consciousness. So this means I'm being dominated by some behavior that's external to me, that could, in one sense, I could approach it in a very stoic way, a very philosophical way, and say, whatever is happening externally here should have no effect on unless I'm very weak, or unless I give it power. It should have no power over me. I might not be able to control how these people behave, but what I should be able to control is how I respond to it. And the way that you respond to it in order to clear the slate so that you can have mental peace, and not for the sake of mental peace, but mental peace for the sake of deep absorption in spiritual practice, is to forgive. Right? Just by forgiveness, you clear out all you clear your bandwidth to focus it exactly where you want to focus it. So that's a practical consideration for bhakti practice or any meditative practice. If you are bearing resentments, justified or unjustified, right? And usually, if we're going to be really honest, usually, even if it is justified, we amplify to the degree to which we feel justified to feel with the resentment. And in many cases, probably it's not justified at all. Or it's so insignificant that we're fools for hanging on to it. I've had the fortune of being around some very deep spiritual mentors. And I saw how they trained me. They would train me like this. Like, there were times when I would go to them and try to unload my resentments to them, right? Download my resentments. This person's saying this about me. This person's doing that. And why am I doing that? I suppose to get some validation for my resentment and get some commiseration in my resentments towards these other people. And these very wise, kind, and expert mentors of mine would do something like this. I'd say, yeah, this person doing this person do that. And it would be kind of like, they're kind of just like, I could see like their attention was just like, you know what? I'm not playing this game. Maybe they would change the subject, like abruptly, so abruptly that it would send a message. In other words, rather than saying, Kastuba, you're a fool, rather sparing me that, they would abruptly change the message, so much so that like the wind was taken right out of my sails. And I got the message, oh, I see. He's not going to entertain my resentments. He's not interested in that. He's really, it's not just that he's not interested in it. He wants to show me that I should not see these things as so significant. That I should not take a tiny little blip in the material energy directed at me, amplify it, let it take over my awareness, and then not only that, start to go around and try to bring it into other people's minds, right? So I was being shown by the men that I respect how to rise to a higher platform as a yogi, right? Let go, right? Nothing good will come. You have an arena in which you can control. Focus on controlling that for your own good and for your own ability to help others. So that's a practical reason within spiritual practice why one would want to forgive. Right? And then on a philosophical or theological level, the idea is also that we accept, yogis accept, Vedantins accept, people that have their faith in Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam and Upanishad, we accept that every one of us, you see this Vedanta philosophy, or this yoga philosophy, we could call it the theology within it, the understanding of God within it, the understanding of who we are and who we are in relation to God. We could call it like a pure soul theology. In other words, we don't say that you're born in sin. We don't say that by nature you are bad. We say by nature you are good. It's just been covered up. Right? But by nature we're all pure. By nature we're all eternal, full of knowledge and full of bliss. By nature, if we go down to the very core of our nature, the very essence of the soul is to love and to serve selflessly with love. That's who we are underneath. Our practices are just to help that arise within us. Help that arise within us. So if that's the foundation of our faith, if that idea is the foundation of our practice, then that means I see, of course, not only myself, but I see every other living being as pure by nature. Right? And this goes back to the question, maybe it was Jeff that asked the other day, or maybe it wasn't, I'm not sure if I remember correctly. Huh? Yes, that in a sense, the evil that we see in the world. How do we understand that? If everyone is pure, or if everyone's essence is divine love, then why do we see so much hatred? Why do we see so much conflict? Why do we see so much evil, you could say? Does it mean that these people are evil at the core? And of course the yogis say no. There's an expression coming from the soul, but it's being filtered through the mind. And the mind can be a very warped instrument. So if someone is, if it's not just our misperception, and if we correctly perceive that we're being treated unfairly, right, then we could say that person is bad, that person's evil, I don't like that person. That would be an unenlightened perspective from the yogic viewpoint. Whereas the enlightened perspective would be the person that's sending out that energy to me, the person that's coming at me in this unfair way, is as pure as any other living being in existence, underneath. And whatever's coming at me is an expression of that purity filtered through a warped mind. So unfortunately, my mind is somewhat warped, and their mind is somewhat warped, and they're sending this energy, this otherwise pure energy coming through the warped mind, and it's coming in my direction. Now, if that's the case, should I resent them? Or should another idea or emotion arise in me that is consistent with truth and consistent with my nature, which is compassion? Right? Like resentment is not part of my nature. No yogi will say that the nature of the self is resentment. As Bhaktivinoda Thakur was saying, within the nature of the self, there's humility, there's forgiveness, there's compassion, there's truth. These are natural to the self. Resentment is not a natural aspect of the self. So I can either act and see and act through an idea, a mental idea that is inconsistent with my nature, which is the opposite of yoga, or I could attune my mind to work harmoniously with my nature, and that would be, I would respond with one, compassion. So unfortunate, hopefully not in a condescending way, but so unfortunate that this person is operating with such a warped mind. You know, my mind is also warped, and I suffer because of it, and I see that they're also suffering because of it. So there's compassion, and then there's forgiveness, right? anyway, I'm not going to hold it against them. Deep down, this person and myself, we're meant to be harmoniously revolving around the root of all spiritual existence. That's our natural state, is that the two of us, along with every other living being in the universe, is revolving harmoniously around the divine center. That's the truth. I want to start operating on that level. And if my forgiveness is where that starts, then let it begin with me. Let there be peace on earth, and let it begin with me. Right? So then there's the practical, and then here's now the philosophical. We can take the philosophical deeper. If I'm feeling some discomfort, some pain, by the way this person's treating me, fair or unfair, from the perspective of understanding karma, as it's taught in Bhagavad Gita, as it's taught in Upanishads, as it's taught in all across the Vedic literature, that my own actions have resulted in this feeling that I'm feeling now, or this energy that's coming at me. It's something that I'm due, right? The entire universe is moving according to my previous actions coming back at me. And not only that, that the law of karma itself is a blessing, even when uncomfortable. Oh, you need to go now.
But I can listen on the podcast too.
Okay. I hope that was helpful,
No,
Jamie.
very much.
Okay, I'm pretty much done anyway. But thank you. Thank you very much, Jamie. I'll see you around. Howdy-bo. Okay, everybody. We're looking for more questions. Yes. Vikram G.
Hare Krishna Consciousness.
Yes.
I have this question in my mind. Maybe I should ask you this personally, but maybe I'll just put it out there. So you just spoke about forgiveness, which is something that I'm trying to learn and inculcate myself. I'm trying to understand it more deeply. In the beginning of the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna is in a state of lamentation. Like, he doesn't want to fight. He might as well just not kill his kinsman and just go to the forest, basically. But Krishna is actually advised, he's instructing him to fight, and he says, if you don't fight, someone else will fight him. So basically, it's like, he's telling him to kill them all, basically. So standing on the other side of karma. So where does forgiveness come in? I mean, shouldn't Krishna be like, okay, forgive them and just forgive and forget,
Yeah.
Why is he telling him to fight and kill them, rather than just forgiving and just moving on, so to say? Just something that it's something I'm trying to understand. Yeah.
Okay. No, that's a wonderful question, and it's an interesting one. Actually, Krishna went on a trip and became the messenger of the Pandavas to beg for the purpose of forgiveness, right? Because even though the Pandavas had been so wronged, and even though they had taken such severe vows that they would come back and fight, still Yudhishthira tried to avoid it. And as a messenger of Yudhishthira's forgiveness, Krishna traveled, I suppose, from Indraprastha from Virata. That's right, from Virata to Hastinapura, with carrying Yudhishthira's mood of forgiveness. Krishna never asked Arjuna to resent. Krishna never asked Arjuna to bear resentment. He asked him to fight, which is a practical consideration. He asked him to fight to regain the kingdom and to right all the wrongs that had been done. But he never asked him to bear resentment. He just asked him to act in a way that was needed as a protector, right? But he said, but do it not full of hatred. Like, he could have said, fight, and do it because they're just so horrible and wrong and bad. But what he said was, fight. What is it? Tasmat sarveshu kaleshu mam anusmara yudhyacha. Think of me and fight, right? Don't think of your resentment towards your enemies. Think of me with love and fight. because of the external necessity for it. So forgiveness was extended. If it wasn't Arjuna's social responsibility to be the protector, if it was someone else that was somehow caught up in this, he could have just said, don't get involved, just forgive and move on. But because of Arjuna's unique position, it was someone had to stand up and do that. So like a police officer, you can't say, oh, look, there's a criminal there kidnapping someone right now, but forgive them. To them, you have to say, act. But never with hatred or resentment, but with knowledge of your connection to the whole. Thank you. That's a good question. More questions? We have a small, intimate, but nicely inquisitive group here today. Jeff.
I'm kind of moving on from the question that I asked today about love and evil and abuse arising
Okay.
in that kind of context. And you kind of mentioned it now, it comes from this warped mind that kind of filtered through. So I've been thinking a lot about it and trying to understand it. So doesn't this warped mind also rise from the greater consciousness?
The consciousness arises from the greater consciousness. But this individual consciousness has freedom. So in other words, the greater consciousness, the Paramatma, right? Higher spirit, greatest spirit, supreme spirit, all emanates from that spirit. All consciousness emanates from that spirit. But rather than control everything for the sake of love, free will is granted to each individual spark of consciousness. And so at that point, it no longer becomes the responsibility of the greater consciousness. It becomes the responsibility of the individual consciousness. We all become responsible for our own actions and our own decisions, like that, our own choices. Does that make sense? Sometimes the idea is that, just like there's rain is coming down, but according to the seeds in the ground, different things grow. And so the Supreme Consciousness is granting consciousness to every individual spark, every soul, every Atma. But that individual Atma is not a robot. But that individual spark of consciousness is granted freedom. Now you make your choices. And you operate within a realm. And within that realm, here's the one thing that it's funny. I'm going to give you I'm going to speak something that I think speaks to your concern, but it also can be triggering. And it's funny because I've been practicing this for nearly 40 years. And in that time, if I would go back 20, 30 years, I never saw this trigger. But it seems like within the past 10 years or so, that this is right where people's minds go. And the idea is that within the realm where this pain is being caused, or the injustice is being caused, or wrongs are being done, in one sense, those wrongs are being done as reactions to the wrong that the victim has perpetrated. Right? In other words, if I feel some wrong has been perpetrated to me, the Vedantin, the one who has faith in these teachings, which include the law of karma, they feel that I've done something to justify this coming at me, because that's how karma works. And when we say that, particularly in the postmodern era, in the most modern part of the postmodern era, people are going to say that's a very dangerous idea, because now what you're doing is you're blaming the victim. Okay, now you're saying, no, the victim's responsible. Child's born blind, it's his fault. Someone is treated in an unjust way, it's their fault. And based on that, it can become a tool for oppression, right? Oh, everybody that's born poor, they deserve it, and it should stay that way. If I'm born in a more fortunate situation, it means I'm a better person. Okay, so that needs to be addressed. Because if one's thinking like this, they are misinterpreting, or let's say, especially particularly, they're misapplying the Vedic teachings and in this case specifically the teachings about karma. Because let's just break this down. But first of all, let me just share that hopefully to some degree, it may not be a satisfying way, but it's saying that we have free will. We make our choices about how we want to operate. And anything that comes back to us is kind of our choice. Right? Any reaction that's coming back at us, we can't really blame God or even the person, in one sense, even the person that did it to us. We blame ourselves as having created the action that brought this reaction upon me. And the deep yogi doesn't even blame the perpetrator. They don't blame what they would call the agent of their karma. Because whether it was this agent, it would have been another agent and another agent. Let me accept the karma as my own due. Let me forgive the agent of my karma, rather than react to it and further perpetuate the cycle. Right? That's the way the yogi thinks. But now does that make sense? Okay. So then now let's go back to what I was saying about misapplying this idea, taking half of the teachings or half of the philosophy on this subject, not embracing the other half of it, which always has to do with compassion, and then misapplying it in a way that it can be oppressive. Okay. So here's an idea, a problematic idea. If I'm born fortunate, it means I'm a better person. If you're born fortunate, it means you are not so good a person. Someone could misinterpret the law of karma like that. And it could be used as a tool of oppression. Now let's step back a bit and let's look more thoroughly at what the sages in the sacred texts teach about karma. What they say is that there are two facets of karma. One is called prarabdha, which means manifested. And another is called aprarabdha, which means unmanifested. Which means that it's like for every action that we do, we collect a seed. And we put that seed in a bag. And while it's in the seed form, it's unmanifested. We don't see the results of that yet. Right? What we do see, like my body is a manifestation of my previous actions, my karma. Whether I'm tall or short or, attractive or not so attractive or strong or weak or born in this place or that place with this advantage or this disadvantage. That's a manifested seed. It's a seed that's grown and the fruits have been produced, and this is how it's manifested right now in my life. Prarabdha karma, manifested karma. Now, if we were to be foolish enough to begin to judge who's a better person based on their manifested karma and ignore the unmanifested karma, then it would be a very incomplete picture, right? Because let's say that I have some kind of very fortunate manifested karma, but I got a bag of seeds of bad karma waiting to sprout. They may sprout tomorrow for all I know, but they're definitely going to sprout further down the road. So my present looks like pretty good, but my future is we're going to see just how for lack of a better word, how bad I've been previously, right? That's all going to come in a big way, in a big wave. Unmanifested karma. Whereas another person may have some unfortunate manifest karma. It seems externally they're in a less fortunate circumstance. But they've got a big bad bag of fortunate karma waiting to sprout. So really, if we look only at the manifested karma, it appears one person has lived a more noble life. But if we had the full picture, we see that it's actually the other way around. Which means that we do not have any ability to determine who's a better person based on the external circumstance. We can't say if one person is born fortunate, another unfortunate, that this person has been better and this person has not been. It would be foolish to try to do that. We don't have the insight to make such a judgment. And it's really not our business to make such a judgment. Because and then another aspect of the teachings is we have to understand that all of these teachings come through one sage, Vyas. And Vyas went into a state of samadhi or trance to access and provide this body of wisdom. But the entire meditation was based on, specifically, it's taught in Srimad Bhagavatam, it was all done, it was all born from the compassion of Vyas. The entire act of accessing the Vedic knowledge, downloading it, editing it, writing it, and granting access to it, it was entirely born as an act of compassion, which logically leads us to understand that in any way that we apply it, it must be applied in the light of compassion. If we were to take these teachings and try to apply them in a way that ignores compassion, caring about another's experience, then we would be misapplying it. Because from the beginning it was meant for compassion. Right? From the very beginning, the entire thing was meant as a tool of compassion. So, again, if in any way that I apply the philosophy of karma, if I do it without that consideration, then I've misapplied it. So therefore we must embrace the entire idea. Is that helpful? Okay. I understand why it triggers. I totally understand. And so my response to that would be, let's step back and look at the entire thing more broad. It's too nuanced to simplify down that way. We might immediately respond like, oh, this can be misapplied. Yes, it can be misapplied. Definitely can be misapplied. Definitely has been misapplied. But almost any good thing can be misapplied. And so let's recognize that it can be a very good thing, and let's carefully understand how it can be best applied. Thank you, Jeff. All right, people. How's everybody feeling? We're good? We're looking for another question out here. Anybody feel inquisitive? Even a little bit? Even people over there that are enjoying their meal. You can take a question from over there too. But we do need one. Yes? I see a hand almost up, sort of. Half-formulated question. Would you like to try?
I came very late, but what I have heard is to sum up from my side, then I will ask you.
Okay.
That if something not so fortunate happens in our life, then as a devotee, we must, as a person who is do not know about the Krishna consciousness, grossly must think like this, that something, it is my product, manifested karma, that is why it is happening to me. Right? Is it the right way
Yes.
to think about it? Fine. Now my question is, when we do chanting, or we try to do chanting, but sometimes we don't do it so well. I myself don't do it so well, with so concentration on the Naam, the Hare Krishna Mahamantra, but I do it, yes, of course. So sometimes I feel I get angry. So yes, of course, the extent of that is decreased like anything, because no strike. But still, that thing happens with me. So it's been 4 years now into doing the japa. So I think, when something comes, I get maybe excited, in a way, get angry in a sense. So I feel like how to sort it out, and I think that the other person is thinking is not understanding me well. But I think that I have a right point of view. This is what how to connect it with the japa and the devotional service. Can please give me some insights.
So, let me see if I understand the question correctly. So, sometimes you get angry, and you wish you didn't, and you're hoping that your chanting of japa will cure you of that. And maybe on the other hand, you're understanding that if your mind weren't angry so much, you might chant japa better too. One way to look at it is, if I could do this meditation better, I wouldn't become angry anymore. What if we looked at it the other way? If I would stop allowing anger to arise in my mind, when I sit down to meditate, I'll meditate much better. You understand? I spoke this last night when I said, this statement that may have been from Abraham Lincoln, that if you give me 5 minutes to cut down the tree, I'll spend the first 4 sharpening the axe, right? Rather than hack away at the tree with a dull axe, let me spend time sharpening that axe. In other words, there's effort that I can put in outside the realm of actually chopping that will make my chopping far more effective when I actually do it. So 1 minute of chopping can be far more effective if I put in 4 minutes of sharpening than 5 minutes of straight hacking away with a dull axe. And so similarly, the way that we live and the way that we train our mind and the way that we behave with other people outside of our meditation time affects our meditation time. So we might meditate and meditate and meditate and meditate for 10 hours a day and really get nowhere. Because outside of that 10 hours, the way that we're living and the way that we're behaving and the way that we're interacting is stirring up my mind and causing, taking up the bandwidth in my mind, so that when I sit down to meditate, I can't do it very well. Okay? So instead of asking, why isn't my meditation making me free of anger? One could say, let me stop allowing my mind to become full of anger, so that when I sit down to meditate, I'll have a peaceful mind. Okay? And so so then how do I do that? You need to look at your mind like an external observer, rather than thinking your thoughts, rather than identifying with your thoughts. Particularly when we get angry, we're deep within the mind, right? You need to be able to look at the mind and say, oh, look at the mind, it's becoming angry again. Not that I am angry, but my mind is operating in through patterns of anger right now, right? And the more that you practice that, the more that you can be accustomed to seeing your mind like that. So now you're in a whole new position. Maybe this anger is strong. Once anger sets into the mind, it begins to set into the body as well. The heart rate increases. Within the blood, I think there are chemicals that are released, And really, you feel it throughout your body. So it's intense, and it can be hard to stop and hard to control. But it starts in the mind. So then the self needs to look at that mind and say, my machine, this faculty that I have for operating with this world, the mind, is working towards my disadvantage right now. It's on its own trip right now. And I need to get it under control. So let me start with my breath, right? My breath tends to become hyperventilated when I become angry. Let me slow down the breath. If I can slow down the breath, I can slow down the mind a bit. And then let me reflect. Then let me reflect on the truth, right? And that's kind of goes to some of the things we were discussing earlier. I am angry because my mind is angry because of this circumstance that's triggered a reaction within my mind and set off this explosion. Let me counter that with reflection on truth, right? And that can be done in many ways. One way we discussed earlier, whatever's coming at me is a result of my own actions. Another way is perspective. Perspective means if we zoom out what seems very important becomes very tiny. What seems very large, when we're angry, we're considering something very small to be very important, right? But when we can zoom out so far that whatever seems so important, we begin to see it as very insignificant. And once we see it as insignificant, its power is decreased. And then we just set it aside. Right? So it's like this. We're meditating, and our faith is that by deep meditation, we do become free of our lower nature. But at the same time, outside of our meditation time, we're very conscious of intentionally countering our lower nature, through reasoning, and through our lifestyle and so on. So hopefully all these things can help. There has to be a little. We've discussed this some nights too. The self has to reach a point of frustration. A healthy frustration. I can't take living like this anymore. I can't take having a mind that takes control of me like this anymore. I'm sick and tired of it. I'm not going to let it happen. You have to have that determination. The more slack that you give your mind, it's going to take it all. You can't keep giving it slack. You got to reel it in. I'm not living like this anymore. My life is short. The time is too short. The time is too important. I refuse to accept this anymore. I'm going to take control. And yogi's got to be strong. Yogi's got to be strong. You sit up straight, you got your determination, and you make your decision, and this is the way it's going to go. And it may be easier, maybe difficult, but this is the way it's going to be from now on. Dear mind, I've listened to you enough, and I'm sick and tired of you ruling my life. I'm taking control now, and there's nothing that you can do about it. So get it straight. I'm not bending anymore. I'm in control. It takes that, Yogi has to be like that. Okay. Yeah. Otherwise, we're just going to get dragged around. Okay. Thank you for the questions. Good one. Done? Okay. Any more questions? Looking for more questions. Yes. Over here on the right hand side. Your name?
Hi.
Your name was?
Let's say that you have a better grasp of your mind than you did prior last year, let's say. And mention your thoughts in a way that they don't control you. But when you're around other people that don't have that same grasp that you think that you have, and slowly it takes a toll on you. You don't even think that it is in the beginning because you say, oh, I'm past that, I'm beyond that. And then you realize, oh, I'm actually very resentful because I feel like I'm internalizing it, but I'm not denying that it's there, but it's affecting me actually. Like the negativity around me is affecting me, or the lack of elevated consciousness, whatever you want to call it. Not to sound arrogant, but just in a way that you're conscious that person isn't there. And you are in a sense, but again, the energy does affect you. And how do you manage that in a healthy way? I struggle to communicate that in a healthy way where they don't get offended, and I'm also protecting my own peace in a way that is not just like protecting it, like getting rid of that person. Okay, now my problems are solved. No, it's like if they were there, it would still be an issue for you. So it shouldn't affect who you are.
Thank you for that question. I never quite got your name. Roy. Yeah. Okay, Roy. Thank you. Where are you from? Okay, Roy. Thank you. So let me see if I understand the question. That we can do some internal work as a yogi, and we may, to some degree, get better control of our minds, better control of our anger, better control of our lust, better control of our greed, better control of that lower nature. We begin to rein it in. Feels good. Feels like an important life accomplishment. But then we travel in circles, work in circles, associate in circles where other people aren't even conscious of this, where other people entirely identify with the mind and body, and they're habituated in patterns of speech and patterns of behavior that are radiating the exact kind of energy that we've gotten under control, at least to some degree. But then we find out that although we might have got it somewhat under control, when we're in that radiation, it radiates right into us and we become affected by it. And that's an important observation. And it's an observation that yogis have been very aware of forever. And they had different ways of responding to it, according to one's circumstances or according to one's choice. Now, one way to respond to that is to walk away from it all and go up into these mountains and find yourself a secluded place and live by the bank of the river. And it's a very beautiful, romantic idea of spiritual life. Today I traveled about 2.5 hours up into the mountains. Oh man, the energy up there is just so nice. Have you gone up? You know? Okay.
And a lot of them were. And a lot of them were also at different phases.
Okay, yeah, I get that. I'm just saying that.
And so we were
Yeah. So, okay, good. And, yeah, if you can get up there and what to speak, we can spend some quiet time, commune with the river and with the sun and the mountain and the wind and slow everything down. And it's not even just nature, although nature is very important, but it's like this nature in these mountains is practically beyond the material realm. It's like practically you're in the spiritual realm in these mountains. So one response would be, I'm going to remove myself from this toxic environment and go into a non-toxic environment. But many of us feel that we can't do that, or we don't want to do that, or that's not our calling to do that, or in some way we feel no. And to make that decision, no, I will remain in the toxic environment, is not in any sense at all a disqualification or an admission of one's own weakness or lack of determination. Because that becomes very clearly spelled out in the Bhagavad Gita. See, because the Bhagavad Gita is this text, it's so fascinating that there are two previous bodies of texts. The four Vedas, which are saying, enjoy this world, but do it in a very dharmic way and reap the good benefits of that dharma and enjoy this world. And then there was another body of literature coming from the same tradition that was saying, don't try to enjoy the things of this world at all. That's foolish. Even if you reap good karma and enjoy, it's always followed by pain, because the nature of this world is that everything material disintegrates and falls apart, and ultimately you have to suffer. So renounce. Don't try to enjoy this world, renounce this world. It's almost like two competing views coming from within the same tradition. And so then the Bhagavad Gita comes along with this absolutely brilliant kind of innovation. And it's coming from Krishna himself, which gives it the highest level of authority. He says there's a way where you engage in this world as if you were a person. Externally, it might look like you're a person being dharmic to enjoy the world, but you act just as dharmically, but you do it entirely detached from trying to enjoy this world. And that's called karma yoga. It's a combination of the knowledge and detachment of the renunciate who goes off into the forest, and the deeply dharmic mindset of a karmi, someone who's committed to the dharmic life taught in the Vedas. Krishna is saying that this isn't even like some kind of second-class yoga. Sometimes he even kind of speaks of it so highly that he's even speaking of it as above the others. You know, he says that one who does their duty in this life as they're obligated, but does so without attachment to the results of the work, he says that they are the true sannyasi, they're the true renunciate, and they are the true yogi. Those are the words he uses, the true sannyasi and the true yogi, the true mystic. So it can be done. It's real and it's valid. And if one really studies the Bhagavad Gita carefully, you'll see so many important instructions on how to do this. But to summarize it, one strategy is to isolate yourself, and the other strategy is to insulate yourself. Insulate yourself and still work within this world. There'll be some important decisions to make. Sometimes you may feel that I am associating with some people that it's just better I don't associate with. It's just too toxic, and they're just not at all interested in respecting how my own evolution, right? So let me carve that out a little bit. Ooh, so good to see you. Great souls. Great. Welcome. So happy to see you, Kalakantaji. Yeah, maybe I have to do a little surgery and cut out certain parts of my life, but it doesn't mean I need to walk away from the world. I can still be very active and dynamic in this world. That's there. But how you operate in that world now has to be driven by your deeper realization. And as you're moving through that world, you have to become accustomed to always reflecting on the knowledge of Bhagavad Gita, as you've now studied and understood. And if you have that knowledge and if you have that detachment, it's all showing in your character. And people will catch on to that. And for people that, I'm going to repeat a story that I've probably done about 4 times over the course of the past month, because your question is not an uncommon one. It's because it's so so important. And that is the example of my wife, who was a Montessori teacher in New York City. And so she has and had a dynamic spiritual life. She had a dynamic sadhana in her life. She would rise early. She would chant japa, do japa meditation, Mahamantra. She would study the sacred text regularly. She'd have a very beautiful daily puja that she would do, a very, very deep form of meditation. And she would take that energy into her workplace. But also she would practice the qualities of a yogi within that arena. And she was able to do it in one sense. She's a quiet person, and she would do it in her own quiet way. She wasn't externally kind of like, she wasn't preachy, let's put it that way. It was all coming through her behavior and her, I suppose you could say, aura, in a sense. She kind of radiated a certain energy. Nobody knew exactly what she was into, but everybody knew she was into something spiritual. And the way that they knew, more than anything, was this: that within that school, there were different cliques or different segments. There were the teachers, there was the administration, and there were the parents. And of course there were the children as well, which is a whole nother world. But within those three, the administration, the teachers, and the parents, there's always tension. Each one of them feels a different kind of pressure. And each one expects the other two to relieve that pressure. But each one feels misunderstood by the others. And rather than really having the kind of conversations that people need to have to understand one another, that's a high level of communication that doesn't always take place, particularly in a high-stress situation. So there's always tension and always a lot of talk, complaining, venting of resentments about the others. And even within the teacher community, which she was part of, even amongst teachers, there was always constant gossiping and complaining, even within just about the teachers themselves. It's kind of was a constant, a non-stop, constant kind of thing. When we're not trained in yoga, we don't have the ability to recognize that this kind of talk serves no purpose. All it does is drag us all down. It makes us all more miserable. It makes us all more weak. But she had this yogic viewpoint, and she would not participate in this kind of thing. And gradually people caught on that when you go to her and you try to vent with that kind of energy, she doesn't commiserate with you. She doesn't enter into your lower state of awareness. She stays on her level of awareness. It became recognized. And to share one, I've shared this also a few times here, but I'll share this also because it's so relevant. I knew one man who was a very deep bhakti yogi. He passed away some maybe 15 or so years ago. And he once said something to me in this context. He shared something in this context that I thought was so relevant, and it was relevant in the context in which he shared it, but it took on a deeper relevance in my life. It showed me the extent that a deeply spiritual person goes to evolve. Because we kind of have, we generally draw lines where we say, this is where it ends. This is where my ability to adjust ends. This is the reasonable level. And I shouldn't be asked to go beyond the reasonable level. But actually, if we want to fully evolve, we have to go beyond the reasonable and go into the transcendent level. So I'll try to illustrate what he said now. He said, if someone comes up to me and they're gossiping, if they're sharing some unimportant, toxic kind of gossip about another person. Now, once I've started the sentence that way, we would think normally we'll go to, well, I'm not going to listen to them, to that person on the lower level, or I'm not going to participate, and that's fine. But that's not what he said. He said, if someone comes up to me and is sharing this kind of toxic information for me to enter into with it, what does it say about me? That they would think that I am the kind of person that takes interest in this kind of low-level talk. There must be something within my own behavior that is illustrated to them that I'm that kind of person, and I better up my game. Like that.
To interrupt
please.
earlier when you said you zoom out to look at yourself as not a reaction to your thoughts. You're just looking from a bird's eye view of your mind, that you are not your thoughts. That's what I'm trying to do.
Yeah.
What is it about me? Because I'm not trying to blame the other person. I'm trying to blame.
Yeah. Excellent. Excellent. So it's likely, now to kind of wrap things up, it's likely that there may be certain people in your life that are not going to understand you. They're not going to understand your practice. They're not going to understand how you're trying to evolve, and they may not even respect it. Some may respect it but not participate in it. Some may not even respect it. And some may respect it, and actually you may begin to carry them with you in the wake of your evolution. They may catch on to that, and it may change them in some small or large way. So that's what I found amongst my wife, is that she actually began to lift the energy in her arena. Now, in the Yoga Sutras, it speaks to yamas and niyamas, which I would imagine you were studying in your 300-hour thing. Yeah. And there, the very first yama is ahimsa. And for each of the yamas and niyamas, Patanjali says that if you fully embody it, if you really embrace it and master it, then there's a certain blessing that the yogi receives, a certain boon, or a certain influence or power that yogi receives. And it's said there in the Yoga Sutras that for one who is fully embodied ahimsa, that within their realm, others also follow ahimsa. And others also conform to that energy that the yogi has. And so I could see that in my wife's life that was happening. That because she was, in a sense, that all this gossiping is a form of violence. Maybe a subtle form, but certainly a form and a very toxic or destructive form. By her not participating in it, by her really embodying that, others began to, at least when they're around her, not engage in that, because it ended with her. She became the ending point of it. So I'm sharing this to say you can influence your environment. There may be certain elements that you can and certain elements that you can't. And certain elements that maybe you can't influence but that are not going to influence you. So there's three possibilities. You can influence the environment. The environment, you can't influence the environment, but the environment is not influencing you. And you can't influence it, and it is influencing you. Right? So where it's having a negative influence on you, you need to consider what adjustment needs to be made. Where you can't influence it, but it's not influencing you, you can make peace with it. And where you can influence it, all the better. All the better. But you need to the yogi needs to be very aware. Like very, very aware of how that's working in their life. So think in terms of insulation. Think in terms of you need to power your sadhana. You need to rise early. You need to meditate. I would suggest, very dynamic practice. You read 20 minutes, half hour, Bhagavad Gita every morning. Take a deep breath. Take a shower. Put on clean clothes. Find a quiet place. Sacred place, ideally. Hold the book and place it on your head. Recognizing that it's not an ordinary book. It's an eternal spiritual message. It is the message of Sri Krishna himself. It's entirely a powerful spiritual entity. And it can speak to you. And it can speak to your mind and speak to your heart in ways that far beyond the way that an ordinary book can. If you recognize that and respect that, it can have a tremendous influence on you. Then you open up the book, you read it. But you don't read it so much like maybe we commonly read books like I'm reading it to kind of like turn the pages and finish. It doesn't matter if you read 1 page or 10 pages today or 100 pages. What you want to do is in the time that you have to dedicate to reading that book, you want to open up your mind and open up your heart to the message that it's going to speak to you. And it will speak to you. If you open yourself up to it that way and you show it that kind of respect, it will speak to you. And it'll give you messages. Sometimes you may not fully understand them. Then you inquire from people who have a deep understanding. And then the message goes even deeper. Like once you've made that extra effort, it starts to become more firmly rooted in your awareness. And in this way, you do this every day. It is a life-changing practice. And what that's going to give you is content that you can reflect on throughout your day and throughout your life. And it's in the moment of reflection that you gain the power to overcome your challenge and that your knowledge matures into wisdom. It gives you a way so that not only are you like, okay, this is a problem, let me reflect. It gives you a way that you're seeing through that knowledge spontaneously. In the Bhagavad Gita, it's called Jnana Chakshusa, the eyes of knowledge. That you begin to just see the world through that knowledge. It's knowledge that is matured to wisdom. When you have that wisdom, it means you become very capable of moving through this world without being affected by it. And that gives you a very peaceful mind. And when your mind is very peaceful, you have the ability to absorb it far more deeply in your spiritual practices. And when you can absorb your mind in the spiritual practices, then the effect becomes very profound and quick and powerful. That's when spiritual life dynamically takes off. We have to not only take in the knowledge, mature the knowledge through reflection into wisdom. Wisdom will grant us a peaceful mind. Peaceful mind can go deep into meditation, absorption. And eventually what develops in Bhakti Yoga, we say, the love that is the very essence of our being. Then it arises. And that's our goal of yoga and Bhakti Yoga. Is that okay, right? Thank you so much. Wonderful questions. Important questions. Maybe at least one more. We'll take. We got 10 minutes or so. Well, okay, yeah. I'm sorry. Remind me of your name. Celine. Celine. You've told me a few times. Now I will remember. Celine. Thank you.
Okay, so I don't really know how to formulate it, but I'll try. It's something that's been bugging me, or that's making me confused. And basically, straightforward, the question is which path to follow. Because, and probably many people ask this question, but there is yoga philosophy, and within that there is what we've been talking about, Ashtanga and Karma and Jnana and Bhakti, and then there's also Buddhism, and there's so many things. And I've been listening to many, like wise people like you about from different paths, and if you listen long enough or if you read enough, it all starts making sense after a while. So how do I know which one to follow, if any at all, 100%, or should I take from different ones, or what to do about that?
Okay. Thank you, Celine, for that very sincere and important question. The Bhagavad Gita is a comparative study of the different spiritual paths, or the different dharmas, right? It's going to talk about what it calls dhyana yoga. 6th chapter goes into a lot of detail on that, which we might call Ashtanga yoga. It's going to give a lot on jnana yoga, a lot of jnanic kind of, sankhya jnanic kind of thinking. It's going to talk about karma yoga in great detail, and it's going to talk about bhakti yoga. Bhagavad Gita is essentially, it is a comparative study of all the different paths. And I have great faith in that text. You see, the question that you're asking is so important, and so central, because all of these texts, if you've been coming to some of the classes in the morning, so essentially everything that I've been talking about from the beginning to the end, and as I get to the end, I think the focus is coming tighter, is that everything that you just mentioned, all the different paths that you mentioned, even including Buddhism, it all grows out of the written works of one sage, and his name is Vyasadeva, right? Srila Vyasadeva. So he becomes the authority that all these different paths are looking to. And if not directly, indirectly, they're drawing from his teachings. And there's his way of speaking, his way of writing, or his way of communicating is different than a lot of the Western philosophies or religions, wherein it's kind of very boldly said, we are right, everybody else is wrong. You must do what we're saying, or you will suffer very, 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 very long time. So do the right thing right now. It's kind of like this, whether one finds it appealing or not, it's very direct and clear about exactly what you should do. And Vyasa's way of approach is very different than that. Vyasa's approach is, there are many different people with many different desires on many different levels, and I'm going to speak to them on all these different levels. And I'll even encourage them to worship this deity or that deity or that deity according to where they're at. And I'll encourage them to follow this path or that path or that path according to where they're at. So I'm going to give a wide range of possibilities for people to follow. And then one can look at it all and say, does this even, is there a consistency in all of this? Is it a big grab bag? Is it a big smorgasbord? Does it not matter which one you choose? Or does it move in one direction? Is there a coherent way of understanding that it's one message, maybe spoken on different levels, but ultimately it's one message? And so some very important sages have set out to illustrate exactly that. That Vyasa is speaking to different people on different levels, and he's trying to build us a ladder of evolution, right? And he's given certain books to be more clear. One is Bhagavad Gita. Bhagavad Gita speaks very clearly. And to give the ultimate clarification for the specific intention of clarifying, he wrote the Srimad Bhagavatam, which again is also very, very, very clear. The Srimad Bhagavatam is like a, I used this phrase the other day, it's like a variations on one theme. It's 18,000 verses, so it's a long work, very long work. And there's a theme, and there's many different stories or narrations in it. I don't even know how many. You know, like each there's 12 cantos, and each canto has many chapters. One canto has 90 chapters, so altogether it must have several hundred chapters. And, you know, so 18,000 verses. So it's a long work, and so many stories told throughout it. But each one of those stories is sharing a theme, different variations on one theme. And that theme is that there are different ways people see the world, and different ways people live, and different ways people pursue meaning or happiness in life. And they're outlined in Vyasa's broad works. One of them is to be dharmic and try to enjoy the things of this world by recognizing that everything's provided by higher powers. Respect those higher powers. Express gratitude to those higher powers. Live a very dharmic life yourself, and you will be blessed by the things of this world. And another way to look at it is, no. The things of this world will let you down eventually, and you'll feel pain. You have a higher potential, a spiritual potential. Don't look for happiness without, go within and find a spiritual peace, a oneness that will be a tremendous relief for you, and it'll feel very blissful. That should be your goal. That's called moksha. So the first one we could call like bhoga, like material enjoyment. Second one is moksha, peace. And then the third one is bhakti, or love. And so what Vyasa does is he clarifies, and he makes very strong arguments when he wants to clarify that love is the highest principle always, and that peace is within that, and happiness is within that. It's all within that. He'll show in Bhagavad Gita that if you practice Jnana Yoga and you achieve the goal of Jnana Yoga and you become Jnanavan, you possess full Jnana, and with Jnana comes renunciation, Vairagya. When Jnanavan prapadyante, when you achieve that state, even if it's taken many births to achieve it, when you achieve it, you surrender to him with love. If you achieve the goal of Ashtanga Yoga or Dhyana Yoga, he says what it leads to is finding God within your own heart and relating to God with love. He says when you practice Karma Yoga, what you practice is taking the fruits of your work and making an offering to me, making an offering to God with love. So the other three of the four yoga paths, he's saying they all culminate. They all give one their means to practicing bhakti. Let me settle my mind so that I can offer my mind and heart to God. Let me break all the attachments in my mind so that I can offer my mind and heart to God. Let me act, rather than seeing myself as the center of the universe, let me see myself as the servant so that I can naturally follow that up by offering everything to God. The path of Bhakti Yoga is unique in the sense that the means and the end are the same. If you achieve the goal of Ashtanga Yoga, have a completely peaceful mind, achieve Kaivalya, wherein your awareness is not distracted by anything external, from that platform, you can find God within and love God. At that point, you don't need to do pranayama anymore. You don't need to do asana anymore. It's like those are means to an end. And the same could be said for Jnana and Karma Yoga. But in Bhakti Yoga, the means and the end are the same. What are the practices of Bhakti Yoga? Chanting God's names, singing the names of God. We'll see in the Srimad Bhagavatam where it talks about the deepest of all, the most fully realized Bhakti Yogis. What are they doing? They're singing God's names. In the perfection, right? So it's the means and the ends. They're glorifying God's pastimes. They're worshiping God's forms with love. It's like the means and the end are the same. It's kind of, you go right to the very essence. So if you're going to ask me what should be your goal of your spiritual practice, I would say that Vyasa has very intentionally illustrated to us that the highest principle in existence is divine love. All of these paths are valid paths, but they find their completion. They find their culmination in divine love, because divine love is the very nature of the self. And so I would suggest that everything that you need, you will find within the circle of divine love. And in one sense, it's not that we should, it's said, sometimes yogis will say when they're asked the question, you ask, should I take a little from all of the different ones? In one sense, they're already overlapping so much already. But they say if you want to dig a well, right, you've heard this before, you don't dig in many places a little bit, you have to dig in one place a lot. So you have to choose a path and focus on it in depth. What I found is that the path of bhakti, it includes the knowledge of jnana. It includes the action of karma yoga. It includes the meditation of Ashtanga yoga. But it focuses right on the essence of divine love. And there's nothing more powerful or dynamic than divine love. This was clearly what Krishna is suggesting to Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita, which is that essential comparative study of all the yoga paths. He's saying, act as a yogi. And you see, when he spelled out the path of Ashtanga yoga or Dhyana yoga for Arjuna, Arjuna said, I don't think I can do this, because the mind is more difficult to control than the wind. That path that requires this intense. Patanjali says, not just intense, he says there's 3 levels of intense, super intense, and all super intense. He says you can achieve samadhi by that super intense endeavor of Ashtanga yoga, or then he says, and do you know what the next thing he says is? Or Ishvar Pranadhan, or you can give your life to God, which is essentially bhakti yoga. So Bhagavad Gita is saying, after he explains all the different yogas in the Bhagavad Gita, the conclusion that Krishna shares is sarva dharman parityaja. All of the dharmas that I've talked, just set them all aside. Mam ekam sharanam vraja, and just surrender your life unto me. That becomes the conclusion of Gita. And I would say that in this day and age, the Gita's message is most important. It speaks to us most clear. It speaks to us most direct. It brings us to the essence. And so I would suggest that you honor every path, and you honor every yogi on every path. But if we want to follow the directions of Gita, Bhagavad Gita, I would say you practice bhakti yoga. Yeah, you practice bhakti yoga, and it'll fulfill all the yogas, all in one. Okay. Thank you, Selena. It's a very nice question. I want to express that I really want to try to say that not in a sectarian mood, but in a mood of trying to understand Vyas and his clear message to us. We'll find that this is all his teachings, and it's all valuable and beautiful teachings, but he's trying to focus us in the most direct way through bhakti. Thank you all so much. This is where I end.
I have just one question.
I know. Okay, I will answer one question, but I'm going to answer it very, very briefly, if that's okay with you.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Truth is one, and lies have 1,000 faces. And if we start working on a truth, a correct path, there will be a lot of losses. Losses like we lose our friends, we lose our business partners and all. If we are on the right path, like always honest, always on the truth, you understand?
I think.
And what's we are losing, we are losing, right? If we are on the truth, what is it right to stay on that path, either on the business, either on personal self, in the personal life, or in the professional life?
Let me see if I understand that right. You're saying that truth is good, and should we live a life of truth even in the business world and in all the different facets of our life? My answer is yes, we should. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you all so much for spending this time. We have 2 more classes in the mornings, Tuesday, Wednesday. Tomorrow and the next day at 9 a.m. I'd be very happy to see any of you there. It goes from 9 till almost 10. And I'll be here for the next 2 nights as well, on those 2 nights before I go back to New York. If you have taken an interest, if you would like to have recordings of the previous classes that we've had, there's about 21 of them so far. Or recordings of these question and answer sessions, simply speak to Gabrielle here. She'll be happy to connect you in such a way where you'll have access to them. Thank you very much. Hari Om Tat Sat.